They told me I was too old school and slashed my pay after 15 loyal years, then handed my life's work to a junior I'd trained. I didn't argue. I just walked out, with something they didn't realize I owned, and by the time they figured it out, the damage was already done. If you've ever been cast aside by someone who didn't understand your worth, share your story in the comments, because sometimes quiet loyalty speaks louder than any boardroom decision. My name is Jeffrey Maddox, and at 52 years old, I learned the hard way what corporate loyalty is really worth. The conference room looked more like a showroom than a place where careers ended. Clean lines, brushed steel chairs, a glass table that reflected the artificial lighting above. Jeffrey Maddox sat across from Vanessa Claymore, the newly installed senior executive from Driftmore Labs, the parent company that had acquired Trilock Woods Works just 3 months earlier. She wore a sharp navy suit, her expression unreadable except for the practiced confidence in her eyes. "Everyone needs to sacrifice," she said, tapping her manicured nails against a sleek tablet. "Your package is outdated. We're cutting base pay by 40% and restructuring commissions to reflect market trends." There was no warning, no build-up, just numbers on a spreadsheet and a cold declaration. Vanessa pushed a folder across the table without even waiting for a reply. Inside were revised compensation details, benefit changes, and a signature page, effective immediately. No thank you. No acknowledgement of the 15 years Jeffrey had spent building Trilock's sales division from the ground up. He looked at the papers. The commission restructure was a hollow promise, tied to performance metrics that were impossible under the new policies. Travel budgets had already been slashed. Entertainment accounts now required 3 levels of approval. This wasn't a realignment. It was a dismissal in disguise. "Is there a transition period?" Jeffrey asked, his voice calm, measured. Vanessa offered a thin smile. "We need everyone aligned with the new direction, starting today." He closed the folder, stood up, and extended his hand. "Thank you for the clarity." That wasn't the response she expected. No protest, no negotiation, just a handshake and a quiet exit. For a moment, her confidence flickered. Jeffrey walked out of the room without another word. He passed through the open concept sales floor he had designed himself 8 years earlier. The framed awards on the wall were ones his team had won. Every account on the top client's dashboard bore his fingerprints. He stopped at his office, stepped inside, and looked around. There wasn't much to take. A photo of his daughters at their college graduations, a gift pen set from Weston Commercial, their largest account, a small plaque that read, "Build trust first, everything else follows." He placed them carefully into a cardboard box. No rush, no scene. Across the hallway, Thomas, the CFO, stood frozen in his doorway. Their eyes met. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His eyes said it all. This isn't about cutting costs. This is about cutting you out. Outside in the parking lot, the sky had darkened with late afternoon clouds. Jeffrey placed the box in the trunk, closed it gently, and adjusted his rearview mirror. There was no anger on his face, just quiet calculation. 15 years at Trilock. When he joined in 2010, they were a struggling regional player, pushing $8 million, 0 cents in sales. Last year, that number was over $70 million, 0 cents. His personal book of business made up more than $12 million, 0 cents of that. Relationships built over dinners, site visits, and emergency problem-solving calls at 10 p.m. And now, Trilock had just handed those relationships to the competition. As he drove home, Jeffrey didn't feel defeated. He felt focused. He understood what Vanessa hadn't grasped yet. His value had never been in his salary package. It was in the trust of his clients, the kind of trust that didn't show up on spreadsheets but dictated where the next contract would go. She thought she was cutting an expense. She had just cut the foundation. Long before sales reports and client retention metrics, Jeffrey Maddox learned his first lessons in business with the scent of sawdust in the air and the hum of a table saw in the background. He was 10 years old when his father first handed him a sanding block and said, "Smooth edges show you care." In that small cabinet shop in Dallas, Jeffrey learned the value of precision, patience, and showing up every day with pride in your work. His father didn't talk much about margins or growth projections, but he talked a lot about integrity. After college, Jeffrey drifted through a few jobs, some in sales, some in operations, but nothing quite clicked. He knew he had potential, but he hadn't found the right place to bring all the pieces together. That changed in 2010, when he interviewed at Trilock Woodworks. At the time, it was a modest regional player with about $8 million. 0 cents in annual revenue. They built custom millwork for commercial projects, hotels, offices, schools. Not flashy, but dependable. The minute Jeffrey walked the floor and met with then-owner Oliver Wainwright, he felt it. This wasn't just a product. It was a craft. Oliver understood what Jeffrey brought to the table. "You're not just selling wood," he told him. "You're selling trust." Within months, Jeffrey was running point on key accounts. Within 2 years, he was assembling his own sales team. He didn't just hire based on resumes. He looked for people who asked the right questions, who could listen more than they talked. People who cared enough to remember that a project manager's kid had a soccer tournament or that a client's anniversary was coming up. Under his leadership, the sales division grew steadily, not in explosive spurts, but through consistent, quiet progress. By 2022, Trillock was doing $73 million, 0 cents a year, with Jeffrey's personal accounts responsible for more than $12 million, 0 cents of that. His team respected him. His clients trusted him. He never missed a deadline, never hid behind an email, and never made a promise he couldn't keep. But things began to shift after the acquisition by Driftmore Labs. The new leadership brought consultants, corporate buzzwords, and a shiny new headquarters renovation no one had asked for. Oliver stepped back. A new CEO took over, a tech guy with no background in millwork. The finance team was overhauled. Marketing became digital first. Jeffrey's weekly meetings with the executive team became monthly, then quarterly, then as needed. His travel requests were questioned. Client dinners had to be pre-approved. Suddenly, the relationships that had been the company's lifeline were being labeled legacy inefficiencies. Then came Vanessa Claymore. She arrived with a Harvard MBA, a polished elevator pitch, and zero interest in anything that came before her. Within weeks, she was running efficiency reviews, holding closed-door meetings with outside analysts, and subtly asserting her authority in ways that bypassed tradition. Jeffrey's recommendations were routinely ignored. Reports he submitted were lost or returned for formatting changes. He scheduled strategy calls with his clients without notifying him. She began undoing the very deals that had kept Trillock afloat during market fluctuations. Long-standing discount agreements, volume incentives, handshake understandings. What truly made his stomach turn was when he saw her at lunch with Gabriella, his newest hire, someone he'd mentored closely. The two of them leaned in, talking intensely. When they saw Jeffrey, Vanessa waved as if it were a coincidence. Gabrielle looked away. He didn't need a memo to know what was coming. So, when Vanessa delivered her decision to slash his pay and gut his commission structure, he wasn't surprised. But he was still human, and after 15 years of loyalty, it still stung. Not because they changed the numbers, but because they'd forgotten who made those numbers possible. Jeffrey arrived home that evening, to a quiet house, his daughters grown and gone, and the familiar creak of the stairs greeting him like an old friend. He loosened his tie, poured a glass of water, and walked into his home office. The room hadn't changed in years. Rows of neatly labeled binders lined the shelf, each one packed with quarterly reports, client notes, and sales data. He sat at his desk and opened the binder marked 2010-1. The numbers were modest then, steady, honest growth, from an $8 million regional supplier. He flipped forward. The charts rose steadily. Year after year, they told the story of his work, his judgment, and his relationships. A story Vanessa would never bother to read. He didn't feel anger, not yet, just a strange stillness. Then his phone buzzed. It was a text from Frank Donnelly, Weston Commercial's purchasing director. They'd worked together for over a decade. Jeffrey had helped Frank navigate 2 restructurings, a difficult divorce, and his son's college plans. They weren't just vendor and client, they were friends. The message was short. Some woman called about our account, says she's your replacement, wants to change pricing and contract terms. If you're staying, let me know. If you're not, we need to talk. Jeffrey stared at the screen for a long time. This wasn't just a job he'd lost. It was a network of relationships built, one phone call, one problem solved, one handshake at a time. Vanessa had looked at him and seen an outdated salary package. What she hadn't seen was the trust that drove $12 million, 0 cents a year through Trillock's books. Trust that didn't belong to the company. It belonged to him. He opened his laptop and typed a draft email to Daniel Harrison at Pinnacle Supply Group. They'd met at an industry conference the year before, and Daniel had mentioned wanting to expand their commercial millwork division. Jeffrey typed carefully, outlining his recent change in status and asking whether a conversation might be worthwhile. But he didn't hit send. Not yet. The next morning, the calls came like clockwork. Jeffrey, what's going on over there? She wants to switch our net terms to 30 days. We've been on 45 for years. Is it true you're stepping away? Each voice was familiar. Each tone carried frustration and loyalty. Jeffrey listened, offered reassurance, and made no promises. After the third call, he closed his office door and dialed his lawyer. He needed to understand exactly what he was up against. The non-compete was clear. No direct sale of competitive millwork products for 6 months. But nothing in the agreement restricted relationships. Nothing prohibited him from consulting. Nothing said he couldn't work with clients on other construction materials. And more importantly, nothing stopped clients from reaching out to him. That evening, he finalized his resignation letter. He didn't rage or rant. He simply acknowledged the change, thanked Trillock for the opportunities, and confirmed that his exit would be effective immediately. He forwarded the letter to HR, then called Frank. "I'm weighing my options," Jeffrey said. "Well," Frank replied, "if you land somewhere, let me know before I have to deal with Harvard Barbie again." Jeffrey chuckled for the first time in days. "Will do." He hung up, leaned back in his chair, and exhaled. Vanessa had thought she was trimming fat. What she'd really done was release the one thing holding Trillock's client base together. No, he wasn't just a man without a title. He was a man with leverage and 15 years of trust walking quietly beside him. 2 weeks after the day his career at Trillock ended, Jeffrey accepted an offer from Pinnacle Supply Group. The role wasn't just a title. It was a promise. Senior Vice President of Business Development, with full autonomy to build the division his way. No corporate handcuffs, no hollow efficiency slides, no false gratitude. Just the work, the relationships, and a clean slate. The morning after he signed the paperwork, he placed a professional call to Vanessa. He kept it courteous, offering to stay for 2 weeks to support a smooth transition of his accounts. Her voice was cool and dismissive. "Won't be necessary," she said. "We've already assigned Gabriella to your portfolio. Your approach, while appreciated, was outdated." Jeffrey let the silence breathe. "Very well," he replied. "Best of luck." 3 days later, he met Frank Donnelly for lunch at a familiar spot in downtown Austin. Frank hadn't returned a single one of Gabriella's calls. Instead, he sipped his iced tea and leaned across the table. "She sent me a client satisfaction survey with 48 questions, then followed up with a PowerPoint on success metrics. I need metrics, Jeffrey. I need someone who answers the phone at 7 p.m. when a project hits the skids." Jeffrey didn't make a pitch. He didn't need to. By the following week, the phone rang nearly every day. Harold Lang from Northwell Construction wanted to talk. So did a director at Austin Modern. Each one shared similar frustrations. Sudden price hikes, policy overhauls, rigid systems, and unfamiliar voices on the other end of the line. They didn't feel like clients anymore. They felt like variables in a spreadsheet. And still, Jeffrey never once made a sales call. These were friends, professionals he'd stood beside through years of late-night shipping disasters, architectural redesigns, and budget overhauls. They trusted him because he'd earned it, one account at a time. Then, one evening, just after 7, he received a message from an old ally, Thomas, Trillock's long-standing CFO. They arranged to meet at a quiet bar off East 6th Street. Thomas looked uneasy as he slid into the booth, glancing over his shoulder more than once. "I shouldn't be here," he said, voice low. "What you are," Jeffrey replied. Thomas pulled a folder from his coat and handed it across the table. Inside was a printed copy of Vanessa's internal strategy report. The title alone made Jeffrey pause. Client Migration Plan. Maddox Accounts. He turned the pages slowly. Charts, retention projections, revenue models. A timeline for transferring his top clients to Gabriella and 2 new hires. Talking points for overcoming objections. Then he saw the number. 17.3 million. Jeffrey looked up. "They always told me 12. Thomas gave a small, tight smile. Oliver knew, but after the acquisition, they kept the full breakdown quiet. "That's 24% of Trillock's total revenue," Jeffrey said. "Almost exactly." Jeffrey leaned back in his seat. Vanessa hadn't just underestimated him, she had undervalued him. On paper, in meetings, and now in strategy. "She's already missed her Q2 forecast," Thomas said. told the board it was a temporary disruption. Jeffrey tapped the folder. It's about to become permanent. Thomas sighed. She thinks this is still salvageable, but she's losing control. Jeffrey nodded, folded the folder shut, and stood. Tell her this isn't personal. Thomas looked at him, puzzled. Then what is it? It's business, and she never understood that. As Jeffrey stepped into the warm Texas night, he realized something simple and profound. He didn't have to fight for revenge. He just had to keep doing what he'd always done. The numbers speak for themselves. Vanessa Claymore didn't waste time escalating. With growing pressure from the Trilock board and misprojections piling up, she doubled down on her strategy. Automated surveys replaced follow-up calls. CRM systems began spitting out templated emails to long-standing clients. And the price increases? They weren't subtle. Legacy accounts that had been nurtured for over a decade were suddenly hit with a 12 to 14% jump with no warning and no explanation beyond realigning with market value. The backlash came swiftly. Jeffrey watched from his new office at Pinnacle as the fallout unfolded. The first email came from Harold Lang at Northwell. They'd been working together for over 10 years. Harold's subject line was simple: "We're ready." The message was clearer. Trilock had proposed a new payment structure and a shift to digital-only support. Harold wanted no part of it. He asked if Jeffrey's team could match the previous rate, and more importantly, maintain the level of service they were used to. Within a week, Northwell Construction became the first of Jeffrey's former top 10 accounts to officially migrate to Pinnacle. Next came Westerly Developers, then Austin Modern, then Weston Commercial. One by one, the clients Vanessa thought she could retain with dashboards and discounts quietly walked away. Not because of pricing, not because of flashy presentations, but because they trusted Jeffrey. Vanessa, now fully aware of the pattern, struck back. A certified letter arrived at Pinnacle's legal department. It accused Jeffrey of violating his non-compete agreement, alleging improper solicitation of proprietary relationships. The tone was sharp, almost frantic. It listed each of the clients that had left Trilock and claimed they'd been unduly influenced. Jeffrey forwarded the letter to his attorney without a word. A day later, he received confirmation. Everything he'd done was by the book. No contracts had been breached. No terms had been violated. He had honored his 6-month restriction on competitive millwork sales. The clients came to him, not the other way around. The next time Vanessa called, her voice no longer carried the crisp confidence it once had. "You're exploiting a loophole," she said, not accusing, almost pleading. Jeffrey kept his tone even. "I'm honoring the exact terms of the agreement your team drafted. Nothing more, nothing less." Silence. Then, a slow exhale on her end. "They've already signed new contracts, haven't they?" Jeffrey didn't answer directly, but the truth was plain. Clients like Harold weren't just dabbling, they were committing. Multi-year agreements, first-look arrangements, exclusive supplier rights in some cases. And Pinnacle, under Jeffrey's leadership, was delivering flawlessly. No press release, no smear campaign, no bombastic retaliation, just professionalism and consistency. And that, more than anything, is what left Vanessa reeling. Behind closed doors at Trilock, the cracks widened. Internal memos leaked. Missed quarterly targets triggered deeper scrutiny. And whispers started circulating in board meetings. Questions about why so many loyal clients were suddenly walking away. The new systems weren't failing because they were wrong in theory. They were failing because they had replaced relationships with algorithms. Jeffrey, meanwhile, remained silent in public. He didn't speak ill of Trilock. He didn't post on LinkedIn or give interviews. Instead, he poured his energy into his team at Pinnacle, into building a client-first culture, into ensuring that every transition was smooth and every promise kept. By the end of month 3, 4 of his former top 10 clients had made the move, and more were circling. The irony wasn't lost on him. Vanessa had once called his methods outdated. But those same methods were now quietly dismantling the very structure she had tried to build. And he hadn't raised his voice once. 2 months after his quiet departure from Trilock, Jeffrey Maddox sat in the sleek, glass-walled conference room of Pinnacle Supply Group, reviewing his division's latest performance report. The numbers were crystal clear. His team had secured $13,700,000, 0 cents in new business. Most of it came from accounts that once formed the core of Triloc's commercial revenue. The transitions had been smooth, the service flawless, and the client feedback overwhelmingly positive. For Jeffrey, it was confirmation. His entire career hadn't been built on legacy. It had been built on substance. And just like that, the industry started to take notice. An article appeared in the weekly Construction Market Digest, buried 3 pages in, but with a headline that was impossible to miss: Trilock bleeding clients after Maddox exit. The story cited insider sources claiming over a dozen long-term commercial clients had left within 8 weeks of Jeffrey's departure. While the company declined to comment officially, the article highlighted quotes from clients who praised Maddox's hands-on affordable. That same afternoon, Jeffrey received a brief text from Thomas, the CFO who had quietly slipped him internal reports months earlier. It read, "Listen to the Q3 earnings call, 3 p.m. Jeffrey closed his office door and dialed in. He listened as Triloc's new CEO, Raymond Peters, opened the call with a flat, prepared tone. The numbers were dismal. Sales were down significantly. Operations costs had spiked. But what grabbed Jeffrey's attention were the comments during the analyst Q&A. An analyst from Eastwood Capital asked the first pointed question. "We've seen estimates suggesting Trilock has lost nearly 20% of its commercial revenue in the last 2 quarters. Can you confirm this?" Raymond hesitated. "There has been some unexpected disruption following our sales team restructuring. We're implementing new retention strategies and investing in digital client engagement." Another analyst followed up. "Can you comment on the recent article in Construction Market Digest referencing key client departures tied to your former SVP, Jeffrey Maddox?" The silence stretched a little longer this time. "We're aware of the report," Raymond said finally. "Our team is currently working to stabilize those accounts and ensure continuity." Gabriella, who had been named as Jeffrey's replacement for client transitions, wasn't mentioned. Her presence had all but disappeared from company communications. Internally, she was said to be overwhelmed. Several clients had gone dark on her, refusing meetings or phone calls. What had once been considered a seamless handoff had turned into a series of abrupt terminations. The systems Vanessa had implemented were falling apart under real-world pressure. And Vanessa? She had been quietly reassigned to strategic development initiatives, a vague internal role with no public-facing responsibilities. The move was announced via a short internal email that avoided mention of performance or accountability, but everyone knew what it meant. The restructuring had failed, the strategy had collapsed, and now Trilock was bleeding. Back at Pinnacle, Jeffrey sat quietly in his chair, listening to the call wind down. He didn't smile, he didn't gloat. Instead, he simply turned back to his screen and resumed work. He'd already declined 2 interview requests that week. Industry blogs wanted his side of the story, analysts wanted quotes. A trade podcast even offered an episode dedicated to the Maddox migration. But Jeffrey declined them all. He had no desire to speak publicly, no interest in rewriting history through media soundbites. The results were enough. The numbers told the truth. The trust he had built over 15 years spoke louder than any quote ever could. Jeffrey had always believed relationships mattered more than spreadsheets. Now the entire industry was starting to agree. A year to the day after Vanessa Claymore told him his compensation package was outdated, Jeffrey Maddox sat in his corner office at Pinnacle Supply Group, reviewing the annual performance report for his division. The numbers were even stronger than projected. $26,300,000, 0 cents in revenue, an 11-person sales team, and a client support unit that had doubled in size. His department now accounted for over a third of Pinnacle's total commercial volume, and unlike the cold, data-driven systems at Trilock, here at Pinnacle, the culture was built around one thing: trust. His team thrived on it. They weren't pushed by metrics or manipulated by restructuring plans. They were empowered to solve problems, listen to clients, and take ownership of relationships. Several of them were former colleagues from Trilock, people who had followed Jeffrey not because of promises, but because they remembered what it felt like to work under someone who respected both numbers and people. Late one afternoon, as Jeffrey wrapped up a call with a new West Coast distributor, his assistant buzzed in. "There's a Vanessa Claymore here. No appointment. Says she's with a consulting group now." He paused for a second, then said, "Send her in." Vanessa entered with a different energy than he remembered. Less polished, her voice just a touch uncertain. She introduced herself formally and mentioned her current firm, Hamilton Group, a boutique consultancy that advised manufacturers and suppliers on customer retention strategies. She'd read about Pinnacle's growth and wanted Jeffrey's perspective for a case study. Jeffrey listened, then stood slowly. "I appreciate the visit, Vanessa," he said calmly, "but I'm fully booked these days." Vanessa looked as though she wanted to say more, maybe to apologize, maybe to reclaim something lost. Instead, she placed a business card on his desk and offered a tight smile before walking out. Jeffrey didn't pick up the card, not right away. That evening, he drove to his daughter's house on the edge of the city. She'd just been promoted to senior architect at her firm and invited him for a quiet dinner to celebrate. As they sat on her backyard patio, grilled salmon cooling on their plates, she asked, "So how's work going, Dad?"